Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Agentic AI systems promise faster, cheaper execution for federal agencies, but they also raise new questions about governance, accountability, and trust. Federal Drive host Terry Gerton talked through what has to change as these systems scale with Karim Fadel, Vice President of CGI Federal.
We have heard a lot and we talk a lot here about AI in government, but you want to bring us around to agentic AI and specifically systems that are framed as something different. What is the modern state of agentic AI and what can it do that regular AI tools can't?
Yeah, so the way I think about it is this, and it's important and helpful for us to think about how we've used Gen AI to date since it's become mainstream. And we've interacted with the chatbots, we've asked questions, we've done research, we've looked at travel itineraries or interacted in that kind of way, analyzing a document, drafting a response. And those things are incredibly helpful. The next step and the next evolution of AI is agentic AI, where systems or agents have autonomy and they can reason, they can act, and they can perform tasks, and they can hand off to another agent across the workflow. And so that's the real difference in evolution from traditional LLMs, and where it becomes very interesting is when you talk about multiple agents working in concert, performing a series of tasks and handing off to one another, and the level of efficiency and productivity becomes very interesting at that point.
Where are you seeing that being deployed in federal agencies right now? Just not as pilots, but maybe full-scale deployment.
Yeah, and I'd like to bifurcate the answer. There's agency adoption, to be sure, and then there's industry adoption to perform work on behalf of agencies. And so I'll try to frame the response in that context. So there are a couple concrete examples. One's at HUD, where we have deployed agents in our call centers on behalf of tenant interactions, so that when a tenant calls into the contact center, agents record and transcribe those calls, and then there's a dashboard that sort of collects and displays all the data and categorizes that data in a way where we can see maintenance requests or rent discrepancies, discrimination complaints. And what becomes very interesting is we can start to understand through language and tone analysis the sentiment of the user. And that's very helpful for a call center representative to improve their interaction with a citizen, to be more compassionate and to show more empathy with the understanding of what's going on behind the scenes, juxtaposing a lot of data. And that's where agentic AI is helpful in that interaction. Another cool example is with NASA. So the Artemis 2 flight readiness assessment was supported by agents that synthesized a huge amount of complex technical documentation and mission data. And so those are two examples of agencies adopting agentic AI and deploying them in production. The other side of the coin is where industry is becoming smarter on agentic AI and the tooling that we're using and incorporating that tooling on behalf of work that we perform for the government. Okay. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. Imagine a systems integrator takes over a contract from another contractor and is presented with a number of systems. Well, using AI tooling, we can obtain a picture of those systems, from documentation to dependencies to integration and interface points, much more rapidly than we could before using AI. And then another example is after we've taken over those systems, we now, through agentic AI, can perform traditional O&M tasks or software development or enhancements or modifications using agentic AI in the SDLC. And that creates significant productivity gains. So those are two sides of the coin.
Karim Fadel is Vice President of CGI Federal. Mr. Fadel, I want to go back to the word that you used earlier, autonomy. So when we have agents, autonomous agents that are working in the background here, and say they start talking to each other, What happens in government programs when agentic AI becomes multi-agent agentic AI?
Well, the value is unlocked. And when you have multiple agents that are orchestrated, it's the combination of those agents and the tasks that they're performing that really unlocks the value. Let's take an acquisition example where there's a number of documents, processing, evaluation, down selection that occurs. One agent doing one task is certainly valuable, but multiple agents across the workflow really unlocks the value.
You know, public trust in government is sort of at an all-time low. If the public finds out that agents and not people are doing all of this work behind the scenes, is your prediction that trust will go up or down?
It's really important that no matter the deployment, no matter the number of agents, no matter the AI that's being deployed, whether on the government side or the industry side, that there's a human in the loop to maintain verification and validation and to maintain that trust. Because if that trust is degraded, then the interaction between citizens and government will also be degraded.
And so I assume that that gets you to a conversation about governance. What is your approach to governance around these multi-AI agent systems?
So obviously, we incorporate standards like the NIST AI RMF and others into any sort of governance conversation that we have. And when we think about agentic AI, governance becomes more complex and has to scale to accommodate the number of agents that an agency is deploying. And so governance deployed in parallel with agentic AI adoption becomes increasingly important, both from a security standpoint and a cost standpoint. For example, we need to monitor token usage so that agencies understand their total cost of ownership. There may be efficiencies gained, there may be productivity enhancements, but if the total cost of ownership, if we lose sight of that, then the cost might outweigh the value and the benefit.
One of the ways I've heard AI governance described is broad streets and high curbs, so that there's lots of room for AI to maneuver, but pretty high guardrails to make sure that it doesn't go outside its boundaries. When you think about multi-agent systems, what gets harder in governance as you try to scale them maybe across agencies?
Yeah, well, I think about data boundaries in response to that question, and ensuring that agents perform tasks that they are intended to perform inside the boundary where they're intended to work. And so autonomy becomes increasingly risky when we think about AI and agents, and it's inherent, it's incumbent rather upon us to establish a government framework that puts those guardrails in place so that the tasks that the agents are intended to perform are performed.
The capacity that you talk about is got to be very tempting to agency leaders, right? They're stressed in terms of resources, they're stressed in terms of staffing. And so deploying agents, especially multi-agent systems on big problems, has got to be tempting. What should agency leaders make sure that they are keeping front of mind as they're considering where to deploy these kinds of multi-agent system tools?
Well, the fascinating aspect of this is that there is an opportunity here to dramatically, materially, or significantly, depending on the deployment scale, reduce O&M costs and use those funds that are freed up as a result for modernization or transformation initiatives to enhance citizen services. And so while there are a number of aspects to think about as it relates to deployment, that's one that's most fascinating to me, that this paradigm has now shifted, and now we have an opportunity and the technology to free up funds to achieve objectives that we weren't able to before.
Tell me more about that. Have you seen it in the examples you gave us earlier? Has the cost curve actually shifted so that they are freeing up more money, or are we still in the spending more money stage?
So there was a report by McKinsey released last week or the week before, where that analyst group was talking about 50% productivity or efficiency gains, and it depends on which lens you're looking through. But the gains now are real. The benchmarks are solid, and so now it's about looking at the mission and the objectives of an agency and understanding where the technology can be deployed to realize that value.
And what is changing for the federal workforce as these kinds of models roll out?
So this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. And I think about the answer to that question, both in terms of the federal workforce, but the workforce at large. I was at Georgetown University yesterday talking to a group of high school students that were taking a week-long AI course at Georgetown. And first of all, how cool is that? I had the opportunity to talk to the future of the workforce on a topic that is incredibly germane to all of us. When I think about them graduating, college, not high school, but college, and I can't even imagine what the workforce is going to look like when they retire. But they're graduating into a hybrid workforce where humans and AI are working together to perform tasks and achieve missions. And that's a different operating model that requires different roles, different managerial techniques, different leadership behaviors, and certainly introduces different risks. This is emerging, but it's an exciting time for us to emerge into a new model where we can be more productive.
Karim Fadel is Vice President of CGI Federal. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.